So welcome to this video. I did a rewind video for TV time. I'm not like a binge watcher. I hardly watch the longer format. Once in a while when I'm in a mood, I guess I watch it, but I'm mostly a film watcher. So there will be more films now in this entry. The films that I've seen in this year, 2021. We'll start from the bottom. Let's go to January. Okay, here we have January. Just have a look at the December movies last year. Yeah, so to begin with January, Crash. This year you have Titan. I've seen Titan as well. Crash is one of the most important inspirations for Titan, you can say. And well, Titan is a very hybrid kind of. There is horror. There is body horror is what people call that, and it's a it's a French film as well, so that's there as well. That is also there. The strangeness comes from the cultural aspect of it as well. But Crash, on the other side, was very much an erotica. Like it was an experimental erotica, but it was an erotica. There was that sexual energy in that film, which was fascinating. I feel. I don't know Cronenberg. I think he's a Canadian filmmaker, so I think he also has French roots. Like there is French culture in Canada as well, I guess. I do like this film as well. I think Titan is more like an entertaining film. It has because it's not just that one thing related to cars. There is another angle to it. There is another character thing to going to. I'll talk about Titan a little later, but Crash is an exciting film. It's a must watch for people who love erotica films. Like I think I love the older ones. There's a film called, I forgot the name, Heat. Not Heat, Body Heat. Right, Body Heat. That's one of my favorite films that you don't really care about. Like when I say I love erotica, it doesn't mean I love the sexual scenes in it. Or you don't really care about sexual scenes. You love the energy that it creates and the performances. And same way, Crash has that. Like it has that energy and it has the performances. And a terrific ending scene. Like it has one of the finest ending scenes of the 90s decade that I've seen. Master, the Tamil film. Yeah, it's what recent. It's a well shot film and stuff. A little over long. This was a nice indie. It's a 2020 film. A very good lead performance from even Rachel Wood, famous for Westworld. The Assistant it's a film that released in 2019, but I think it was in contention for awards and stuff in 20 it means in the early 2021. It's a film about the Me Too movement, but in a very subtle and not about the Me Too movement, but things that are included in the Me Too movement, but in a very subtle way. And it as the name of the film suggests, it's the assistant, and it's her perspective, and we are restricted to her perspective. But it's a very shocking and a very horrific perspective because she is a kind of an outsider. She is in the same building, she's in the same office, but she's outside the cabin. And this is that outside the cabin perspective towards sexual harassment and how people at power exploit young aspiring people in the film industry. That's what the film is about. But it's a very like a very outside, not outside again as it is, a very third person perspective, but that's what makes it even more like kind of horrific. Like it tells you that even from that perspective you can sense what's wrong with this, what's wrong, the wrong things that are happening inside the cabin and to the people who come there in the office. Minari again was one of the beautiful family films that I've seen. A 2020 film, another 2020 film, really. Shaun of the Dead is a rewatch. I've seen it a lot of times, and I love it. Hackers. Now, this is a famous film to be known as one of the so bad that it's good kind of a film. But yeah, like it's really like it predicted what, not, it's not a dystopian film, it's not a futuristic film, but it kind of like predicted the impact of cyberpunk and the impact of internet and the impact of hacking and all that stuff, and how did that happen, and it didn't really happen that way, or it was really wrong at many places. Like, it didn't get many things right, and that's what makes it funny. Yeah, Darkman is one of the few comic book movies that were made in the 90s, starring Liam Neeson, and made by the guy who later on went on to make Spider-Man movies, Sam Raimi, and is known to be a horror filmmaker. So there's more of kind of a horror edge to this film, and there's also a noir kind of edge to this film. Like in the 90s, there was this caper comedies. Like, this is not a comedy, but there were caper comedies. So it has that caper feel to it as well. Like, the villains in the films are not super villains. They're just criminals. Like, that is what the film does. It brings together all those different worlds. There is fantasy, there is science fiction, there is superhero stuff, and there is crime caper noir kind of stuff as well. It was an interesting film. Visuals of this film were excellent, which is what represents Sam Raimi, I guess. Primal Fear, I have seen the Hindi film that was copied from this and made, and it is one of those films that I actually really liked as a kid. But after watching Primal Fear, I felt that the film is very different. The Hindi film that was copied from this, like, it did use the primary things, some basic things, but it did went on to still make a different film. I wouldn't call it a copy anymore. This is very more concentrated film. Like, it's very specific, and it understands the idea of a thriller, and it stays a thriller, whereas the Hindi film is more of a drama that has moments of thrill here and there. Silver Linings Playbook, I don't know, I've given it 5 star, but I don't know, maybe I think I'll have to watch it again someday, and I will realize that maybe I don't like it that much. But it was a very fun film, it was a very enjoyable film, and both the lead actors were very good in it, which is why I feel that I was a little overwhelmed by that film, because I think when the actors are good, you are overwhelmed. But when you watch it for the second time, that maybe the actors, like, they have a little less to do with it, then we'll see. Girl Interrupted was a good film. Leaving Las Vegas was an excellent film. Nicolas Cage really gave a terrific performance in this one. Like, the end of the world romance is what I call it. A twist to it. There's a subgenre in romance, love story set in some kind of fantasy, or the twist being that there is no external apocalypse here, so it's all self-made. Like, Nicolas Cage is like a toxic guy who alcoholic guy who just wants to, like, drink himself to death kind of a guy, and the woman, who is a prostitute, ends up being in love with him. I won't say falling in love with him, being in love with him, and their relationship it doesn't really have a future, but it has a present, and that present, while it's disturbing to watch for a third person as viewers, it does mean something to them. It is important to both of them, and I think that's the beautiful part, that's what romance is like. It's not for the third person. It doesn't matter what the third person thinks about it. The people involved in it, if it means something to them, then it's important. So it's an interesting film. I think this is the film where he got an Oscar for, right? Am I right? Yeah, I guess. Yeah, but I liked his performance a lot, but I think The female performance was like even more extraordinary. I think the actress Elizabeth Shue, who happens to be one of the cast members of the Back to the Future film as well, not the original Back to the Future, the Back to the Future Part 2, where Marty's girlfriend was replaced and no one knew about it. I never knew about it. I knew it much later. It was not the same girlfriend that was shown in the first film. So the second girlfriend that was used, that was Elizabeth Shue. So moving on. SLC Punk is an interesting kind of a American version of Train Spotting, but it has that punk culture, punk music culture. It's a bit of that as well. Nightmare Before Christmas. All these are first time watches. I'll tell you which are rewatches. Time to Kill. Buffalo 66 is an interesting film. It's an interesting indie, kind of like a bit ahead of its time, not because of it says something extraordinary, but the way it is made. It has a very 21st century kind of indie cinema vibe to it. And in the 90s, you didn't have many films that were that way. Breaking the Waves is one of the most insane films I've seen. It's an insane film, really. It really is like it defies two things: the norms of what a romantic film can be, and the norms of what religion can be. It really challenges religion, and yet it glorifies religion. It's a very strange film. It's a very powerful, like led by a very powerful performance from Emily Watson. It's a terrific film. If you haven't seen it, you must. It's one of those uncomfortable films about religion that are still religious. Like it still believes in religion in a very like strange way, in a very indirect way. True Romance is another fun film that I really enjoyed. I think it's a film that Quentin Tarantino wrote before he was Quentin Tarantino. But it was really fun, I think. But the fun part of this film is not the writing. I would be very honest about this. It's the way the film is made. It is really made with style, and it's just too much fun. It's not deep. Like it is very surface levels. There are a few dialogues that are very interesting. Like that's what Tarantino dialogues are. They're always very interesting, but it's nowhere close to, let's say, what Pulp Fiction was later. But it's still a very fun film. It's made in a very fun way, and that's what makes this film interesting to me. It's not the writing, it's the way the film is made. Yeah, so that's there. Light Sleeper is Paul Schrader film. It's like a slightly cheaper version of Taxi Driver, I would say, but it has an interesting lead performance from Willem Dafoe. Moving on, Malcolm X. This film really had an impact on me. I really loved this film. I think it's a very kind of a like it has a different periods of his life are represented with different cinematic style in this film by Spike Lee. You don't expect Spike Lee to be that versatile as a filmmaker. Like I've seen a few of Spike Lee films. I think he's a great director, but there's something that is inherent about Spike Lee, that this is how Spike Lee makes his films. But while watching this film, you don't feel that way, because all those different parts in the films are directed in a very different way. Like according to the life story or what's happening to the character, those parts are directed in, like, if this film was only about that part alone, how would that film be directed? That's how he directs those specific parts of his life. And it's and the person itself, I think the story of his life itself is so important that it becomes a very fascinating film. Yeah, and obviously a great performance from Denzel Washington. This is another ahead of its time 90s film, which I think that something like A24, what we see from A24 today in the 21st century, in 2021, 2020, 2019, this was very similar to that. Like it had that kind of vibe, A24 vibes. That's what A24 fans call it. when a film is not A24 but it feels like an A24 film, you say that it has A24 vibes. So Safe was the most A24 vibes in the 90s. Like, really, it's a very strange narrative of the film, and I'm not gonna talk anything more about it. Just watch the film, like, if you haven't. And if you are a fan of A24 films, Naked is an extremely well written film, one of the finest written films of the 90s. Exceptional dialogue writing, exception monologues. Like, it's a very theater kind of film. It's a very play kind of a film. A guy speaking. That's what it is. But it's a fun film. Like, it also has that vibe of the 90s. Like, there is something common between these films, Safe, Naked, and I think there will be a few more films that I think will come to it later in the 90s, that these films were like set in a period where the 90s people had fear that the world is going to end, something like that. The AIDS disease was discovered, and all strange things were happening around the world, and people were thinking like this is the end, and the 20th century was gonna end, the 21st century was gonna begin, and people were afraid that some really strange things are gonna happen, and the 21st century is gonna be like how they show in the older sci-fi films. And out of that, some art was created, out of that fear and that anxiety. And Naked and Safe, these are part of those films. Naked is more vocal about it, in like directly through dialogue. Safe is more cinematic about it, but they both go through the same feeling that people back then had, artists and creators would have had. In the Name of the Father features a terrific lead performance from both the father and the son, Pete Postlethwaite and Daniel Day-Lewis. A terrific casting of father-son. I've never seen a better casting of father and son. They really had terrific chemistry. Boys from the Hood was an interesting film. The way it was made was very specific to the 90s. Like, for example, if someone makes a film like that today, let's say the guy who made Moonlight, if he makes this film today, he will make it in a very indie kind of way. But Boys in the Hood was not made that way. It was made in a very mainstream kind of way, and it made it like, now it has aged a little. I mean, watching it in 2021, it did feel like it has aged. But that's the charm of the film, because now you don't make such films, or you don't make such films in such a way, and that's why it feels unique now, and it feels entertaining and still effective. Like, it still makes the point of the social reality that it's based on. This was interesting. Another dialogue heavy film. Yeah, well directed, well performed. The Apartment. Oh. This was, I guess, the film of the year for me. I hadn't seen The Apartment before, and I was really blown away by its simplicity and its beauty. The dialogue writing, again, phenomenal dialogue writing. I feel that when you watch the older films, Billy Wilder films in specific, or in general older films, you see that the dialogues are there not just for a purpose. They're not there for exposition, or like Tarantino uses it for them to be cool. Older filmmakers or older writers use them not just to be cool, but there were different kind of emotions that one could be specific about, and the whole film would be specifically enhancing on that particular emotion through the dialogue writing, which is what we don't do now. I guess we are not dependent on dialogues in that way. It's a good thing and a bad thing both, because we're using the cinematic medium overall in a complete way, and not just the dialogues. But I think a film like The Apartment really makes you feel special. Like, that era of dialogue writing was, it also made sense that the dialogues were written that way. Funny Games, another strange film. Extremely well directed. I think it's the way the film is made is what makes this difference compared to, let's say, any other modern exploitation oriented film. Funny Games, the way it was directed, it's not it becomes disturbing, but not in a not in a fun kind of way. You cannot enjoy Funny Games, right? You're not gonna rewatch this film as well. You shouldn't rewatch this film, but it makes this but it's the narrative of the film. It's still very similar to an exploitation film, but the way it's said, it satirizes the whole genre, and it satirizes people's urge to violence in cinema, uh, and yet it does end up doing that. Like, it still ends up portraying violence and disturbs you, and also makes fun of it. So it's a very strange film. It's a one watch film. You don't watch such films again and again, and shouldn't. There's another film that I feel is one of the most disturbing films I saw this year, and it was also another 90s film. I'll come to that. Run Lola Lola Run. I saw this film for the first time this year, but I knew a lot of stuff about it before. Star Trek films, I saw them again. Great Indian Coach. Children of Men, gosh, this is one of the finest directed films I've seen ever in my life. The finest short film that I've seen ever in my life. Some set pieces in this film are extraordinary, and narrative wise as well, it's very simple and perfect, simple and deep, and there is also like a spiritual and faith oriented and allegory that is going on, that reminds you of something like Mother, Darren Aronofsky's Mother. But it's just is like the way the film is being shot and way made. That's what again makes the difference. It's not just the writing. It's the way the film has been made. La Haine was interesting as well. Like, Do the Right Thing is a film that Spike Lee made in the 1980s, late 1980s, and this film happened in 1995. So this film definitely had a huge inspiration from Do the Right Thing, but it had the French cultural backdrop to it, and that made it very much of its own film. Another very impactful film and an impactful filmmaker that I discovered this year was Theo Angelopoulos, the Greek filmmaker. The other Greek filmmaker that I love is Yorgos Lanthimos. This was really, like, I still cannot forget the opening scene of the film. It's the most beautiful thing I've seen. It reminded me of Roma. Again, Alfonso Cuarón's Roma. Such a beautiful thing. Like, a kid in his house is just peeping out in the afternoon and is going to the sea to play in water without his mom realizing it. And the mom just calls him to have a check on him or something like that. And it starts with that faint kind of memory of childhood that the protagonist of this story has about his life, and then his those flashbacks of his life that he's lived. He's an old man. He's an artist. He's a poet, and the flashbacks of his life keep coming back to him, and the reality of his present also stays with him. And there is another young kid who is not like him. He comes from a different country. He's a refugee. He's a poor guy, and he has his own present as well. So the kid's present, the old man's own present, and the old man's own past, all these things are like intermingled together to a beautiful experience that pleases all our senses. It's a beautifully shot film as well. I think one of the finest cinematography I've seen from the 90s. Some more film. Afterlife, another beautiful film. Very simplistic. As I said in this review, that once you take away the burden of exposition from a film like that, you can discover different meanings of the same different meaning of the concept. And that's what this film did. It's a very indie kind of film, a low budget fantasy film, science fiction fantasy, you can say. Very heavy on subject, but very simplistic. Children of Heaven, I did enjoy Children of Heaven, but The White Balloon is a film that I love more, and I felt that Children of Heaven did have an influence from White Balloon, heavy influence I would say, in terms of the way it dealt with the protagonist and his story. and their urgency, then the urgency in their story. Hard boiled again. First time I saw it, I wouldn't say I'm a fan of John Woo, but I've seen John Woo's films before this. But this is where I really became a fan. Like now, I want to watch all the films that he made in the 80s, especially the films that he made in Hong Kong, the action films that he made in Hong Kong. I haven't seen any of them yet, but I am really excited to watch them. The whole climatic sequence of this film is mind-boggling. The whole hospital sequence and the kid in that sequence is just mind-boggling. He's in the poster as well, and the way the kid is used as a prop as well as it adds to the stakes of the action scene. It's phenomenal. It's just phenomenal craft. A Summer's Tale was an interesting find for me. A French film. The narrative of this film is could be very similar to any mainstream romantic comedy, I would say, or a romantic triangle or something like that. But the way this film is made, it has that whole sense of reality to it, and that's what makes the difference. Again, story level very similar to any romantic story, the romantic triangle of coming of age, where people who are not sure of what they want in life and stuff. But the way it is made, it all just feels so authentic and so real, and it feels like these are real people and these are not characters of in a story. Life is Beautiful. Life is Beautiful is a film that I really liked, but not the first 48 minutes of the film, as you say. I'll say it's not a bad film in the first 48 minutes as well, but it's a very different film than what I expected it to be, I guess. I have to rewatch this. I think I have to rewatch those 48 minutes, and maybe I would make some different sense out of them now. But many people have a lot of problem with the later part of this film, the second act of the film and the third act of the film, but I really liked the second and the third act of the film. I feel that it's not supposed to make fun of those. It's not a crude joke that is made on the Holocaust, which is what people think of it. Many people think of it and talk about it, and people say that it's a film that hasn't aged well because they don't get the whole funny perspective towards the Holocaust. But my point is, it's never funny. The whole film from the second act, it's never funny. It is very dark. But it's not dark in a very direct way. It suggests things that are very disturbing, and it's very nuanced. The whole thing is very nuanced. So I feel that I never found it very funny, or it's not even intended to be funny. And that, I feel, is what I guess some people miss out on. I don't know. But it's a film that I want to rewatch, and maybe the first 48 minutes that I have a little problem with can make more sense to me now. This is another disturbing film. Again, I think it's a Danish film or something. Thomas Winterberg, who made another 2020 film. What's that? Another Round, right? The Hunt, and all these films. Exceptionally short film. It's like I've written in the review. It's like wildlife shooting, like a documentarian shooting wildlife when the animals are very up close and then they might attack you. So you have the fear of while shooting them. It's a family dinner and a family celebration that's going on. And the family is not normal, obviously. It's a dysfunctional family, but it's an extreme dysfunctional family. There's a bit of exaggeration in it as well. This was a terrifically directed film. Abbas Kiarostami. Peppermint Candy, another mind-blowing 90s foreign language film. Excellent film. Cruella, Rebels of the Neon God. Gosh, this was again a brilliant film. This is really brilliant. I think this is where the Asian cinema was really becoming something else, I feel, in the 90s, I guess. Because before that, it did have its own world. Like filmmakers like Kurosawa and all those guys and existed. And there were also some other filmmakers that I have wanted to watch a lot of their films. But the 90s is where I feel that the urban Asian films, the contemporary Asian stories, were on rise, and filmmakers that were making films on the contemporary reality of their country and their culture was on rise, and which is where I think it gave a new edge to foreign cinema, to world cinema, which it was not just restricted to French films or European films, but the Asian films were started being more relevant and not just being distinct from the Western culture. Because if Western audiences or any urban audiences watch these films, they can very directly relate to such films, whereas the older films, I guess, were a little different for the urban audiences. They might not relate to them as their stories, obviously with some exceptions, that films about urban reality were also made by old Japanese masters, but the prominent stories, that were the films that were more famous, were not about the contemporary reality. Jackpot. I haven't seen Cinema of Agnes Varda. Again, I've discovered her. I've heard of her from a long time, but I hadn't seen. So I saw this film that she made about her husband, about how he got influenced from cinema as a kid and how he grew up to become a filmmaker. And it's a very beautiful film, but it need not just be looked as like the story of her husband. It's a beautiful story of a kid. It's a coming of age story, and it's about passion for cinema, and it's about the period as well. There's always this backdrop of the war, but it is as I said in the review, it's like a warm blanket for everything that is happening around during the war. It's a beautiful film. It's a beautifully shot film. The cinematography, the black and white cinematography. Central Station, it's a Brazilian film that is produced by people from Hollywood. Robert Redford was one of the producers, so it has a certain kind of a professional, a mainstream Hollywood feel to it in terms of the visuals of the film. But it inherently is a very simple and a very heart-touching story, and a very relatable story. And I feel that as Indians, we always relate. Not always. I mean, we have seen very few films, but I feel that as a culture, we relate to the Brazilian people. That there is disparity, there is economic disparity in Brazil that is there in India as well, and people live together in small areas, very close to each other, populated countries. So it is very culturally similar, Brazil and India, I feel, and I feel that such stories, they are inherently workable everywhere. Like if someone decides to remake Central Station in India today in Bollywood, it can work. That story, it can definitely work. But there's also a religious allegory there, I feel. So that might not work for us, but it doesn't matter. They'll find some different thing to it. Well, folk, Only Yesterday, a terrific film. One of those silent, lifelike animated films that I've seen. This film and Persepolis, I think I saw Persepolis this year. Yeah, Persepolis. They both are like two two spectrums of the same prism, or whatever you say that way. They're like, they are a little similar in the female perspective and very lifelike. But Persepolis is about a darker world. It has some really strange, some disturbing things in it, about the Middle Eastern world. Whereas Only Yesterday is much more sweeter, but it is still very lifelike. It's not escapist. It's very lifelike, and it also has the female perspective as the most important thing in the film. And it also plays with timeline. Only Yesterday, and that was also common with Persepolis. Persepolis also plays with timeline, like the same character in different stages of a career. That is common to Only Yesterday as well. Bombay Rose is an Indian animated film, a Bollywood film. Won't call it a Bollywood film, but it does use the template of Bollywood romance. It's based on it, but it's animated beautifully. I think that's the strength of this film. I didn't, as I said in this review, I didn't really enjoy it in the film festival. I left it in between. I was in some different mood, I guess. I was not really ready to watch a film that feels like a Bollywood romance film, like an old Bollywood romance film, a tribute to it and stuff. I was not in that mood. But when I watched it later, now, it really felt good. I think it's felt good most importantly because of the way it's been animated. It really has a language to it. The visuals of this film has a language going for it, and which is what made it interesting for me in this watch. Poe Burnham inside, I can talk a lot about this film, but I need not. I think it's just an experience that needs to be had. It need not be called a film all the time, but we always keep calling it. All the fans of this film or this thing, they always want to say that it's redefined cinema, or it's the new cinema. It's how cinema can be in the future. Something like that. It's the indie cinema in particular. But whatever it is, if it's a film or not, consider it as a feature film or not, doesn't matter. What really matters is what it makes you feel, the experience that it gives you. And that's what is more important. This is an interesting Indian film, an older one that I ended up watching on the OTT, and I enjoyed it. I feel it was very simplistic. It was very unpretentious, and it was directed well, and it had a good lead actor. Yeah. Some other Studio Ghibli films here. Poco Rosso, Perfect Blue is an exciting film. Was an exciting film for me, and I do admit that it definitely has a huge influence on Black Swan, I guess, and many other films that were made in the 21st century. Raging Bull. This is not my first watch. I have not written here as a rewatch, but it's not my first watch. I really loved it, and the most defining factor of how different it was from Goodfellas. I felt that Goodfellas is a very incident-oriented biopic, whereas this one was a very character-driven biopic, and both are different kind of people. Like in Raging Bull, the lead character of Jake LaMotta holds the strings of his life in his own hands, whereas in Goodfellas it's different. That the protagonist Henry Hill is a part of the bigger game, and he is just one little, like a soldier in this whole chess game that has been set up. He's one little part of it. So he doesn't hold the driver. He's not sitting in the driver's seat of his own life. He's in the back seat, and someone else is driving his life, and he stays that way. And the events, and hence the events become more important than him, than his character, and he stays as a spectator. This was a terrifically directed and a terrifically enacted film, with, I would say, compared to other scripts of PTA, this was not his finest script though. I think this could have been this could have been a greater script, but still the way it was directed, the way it was performed, it elevated the film extraordinarily. I've rated it 4.5, but I think I like some of the other PTA films more. I think I've listed all the PTA films that I've seen. Here we go. So as you can see, I also don't really rate Boogie Nights as his best film or something, because many people do, but I somehow feel that Boogie Nights is a little narratively, again, a little similar problem to Master, that it's, in terms of the writing, it's a Boogie Nights in particular, I feel that it's a little immature. I didn't want to use that word, but it is. That's what I feel about it. I think Boogie Nights is a little immature in terms of writing, because it does have a lot of complex characters and different kind of characters, but it doesn't do a lot of great stuff with those characters. And the reason why I feel this way is because we know what Paul Thomas Anderson was capable of in terms of complex characters, and the reason for it is Magnolia. Like a few years later, he ended up doing some magical things with characters, in particular in Magnolia. And Boogie Nights was a character-driven film. That's why the problem is there. It's not a narrative-driven film; it's a character-driven film, and hence then what you do with those characters become more important. But again, it was a terrifically directed film, a terrifically enacted film, which is what it still makes it a great film. But I feel that the writing could have been uh, a little more directional, I would say. Punch Drunk Love, exceptional film. I loved Punch Drunk Love. It's a 5-star film for me. Everything was perfect. Characters, the way it was directed, the way it was edited, the way the sound has been used and the music has been used in the film, exceptional. Also with Magnolia, obviously. Both Magnolia and Punch Drunk Love, exceptional the way he directed those films. There Will Be Blood, again, a very direction dominant film, but it's the writing of the film is also exceptional, I feel. Phantom Thread is a film that I saw in theaters, and I did love it. I think it's this now Phantom Thread is a film that is more heavy on the script. Like, now this is the film that he this is the kind of films that he makes now. Like, he doesn't make huge canvas films. Like, There Will Be Blood, I think, was the last huge canvas film that PTA made. But now I think there are practical reasons why he cannot make huge canvas films. Like, no one probably puts that much money into directorial uh, passion projects for people like Paul Thomas Anderson, unfortunately. But it doesn't really matter. He can still do his magic, and he did that magic, I think, in a film like Phantom Thread. And I'm sorry that I haven't seen Licorice Pizza because it hasn't released in my country, or it hasn't come out anywhere on the OTTs as well. So moving on, have quickly go through the next few films now. Pig was exceptional, 2021 films. Last and the Real Girl was really the finest performance of Ryan Gosling for me. Zola is a 2020 film. It released in festivals in 2020, but it's considered a 2021 film by many, and it was one of the most funky films that I've seen. It was really fun. It was new age, as was for so the new age A24 film. Sarpatta Parambarai, the most important Indian film of the year, without a doubt. Sarpatta Parambarai, film on boxing, and it should be considered as one of the most important films made on boxing. Definitely the most important film, I would say, in India. Ordinary People is a film that I discovered when I was looking out for a film that has that talks about mental health and how mainstream Hollywood deals with the subject of mental health. And I was really surprised, and I was totally, I would say, unexpectedly shocked by this film. It's an exceptional film. It's a very difficult film. It's a very difficult film to watch at times, because it really like talks on the very personal things that all of us who live in families, we all have experienced these things in little or more measures. And this film really puts those things out, and it makes you think about your relationships very seriously. A terrifically made film, and it won the Oscar ahead of, I think, some other film which was later said to be snubbed by this film. I don't know which film that was. Maybe Taxi Driver, I don't know. Yes, some film, or The Shining, I don't know. And people say that it was this film snubbed that film, and this film won the Oscar. But I think if maybe ahead of its time or whatever, I don't know how people look at it today. Probably it has a high rating, so yeah, probably people understand the nuances of this film. But yeah, but it is a very heavy film. Like, it's not supposed to be like, it cannot be seen as an Oscar winner film in a conventional world. Like, these are not the films that you consider as Oscar winning films, and yet it won the Oscars. Maybe that's why people thought it didn't deserve it, maybe. But it's an extraordinary film. Oscar or not Oscar, doesn't matter. Some films here, yeah. Enemy, Gravity, you can see I saw a lot of films that are very important, but I hadn't seen them before. from 2010s and 2000s as well. This is a film that I really, really loved. I think it was an extraordinary film. The perfect definition indie film. That is still very universal. Like I've called it an indie film, but it's a film that can work for every kind of audiences all over the world because it's about some basic human things. And it's terrifically made. It's also made in a way that everyone can understand and enjoy the film and be affected by it. Enjoy is not the right word. It's be affected by it. Yeah. Gladiator. I really loved Gladiator. I hadn't seen it for some years. This is one film that I really, really was again shocked by. In the last few minutes of the film, it really hits you hard. It hits you hard in a very unexpected way. And again, like ordinary people, it makes you think about your relationships in a very serious way. And that's why I called it a terrible film, because its aftertaste is a little bitter in terms of the human experience that it gives us. Titan, here's Titan. I've said this in sarcasm. It's not the heartwarming, feel-good film, but it is still a father-son film, and it's still a very emotional father-son film. And I'm saying father-son film, though the protagonist of this film is a female. And that's all I'm gonna say. So there is a twist in it. If you watch the whole film, you'll know. This is a strange film that I saw. One of the smartest indie films, I would say, of the 21st century. So really a very smart film, like in such a small budget with no real external things, you can make such an impactful thriller, and which is also funny in a way, but not funny. Like it's a joke that stops being funny at some point, and it really makes you uncomfortable. That kind of a funny film is Creep. Tick Tick Boom was fun. It was fun. Andrew Garfield was good in it. Gone Girl I saw for the first time again. One of the popular films, and I was really, really like shocked again. Shocked for the way it talks about marriage and relationship and toxicity in it, and how mostly marriage is not an easy bet, and it's really, if you're lucky if you're happily married. The Last Duel, I really liked it. It's not the Gladiator. It's a complete anti-Gladiator film, but it's really well made, and it knows what it is. Like it wanted to be the film that it is the film that it wanted to be. It is perfectly in align with the modern world as well. The Power of the Dog is one of the nuanced films that I've seen, the most nuanced films of this year, and I think maybe it might result in a lot of nominations in the Oscars. I don't think it will win a lot of awards, but it will be nominated for a lot of awards, and I think that would be more than enough for a film like this. Like it is a smaller film, but it's really like the nuances and the between the lines is what this film is about. The things that are happening around in this film, and the characters, the things that are happening to the characters in the film are not spoken directly, but you can feel them, you can sense them, and it gives you a very lifelike experience. You feel like you know these people in reality. You're also reminded of the people of your own life, in your past, your memories, when you were a teenager or a kid, and you had an uncle or an aunt or whatever, who had a certain kind of impact on you as a kid, and probably they left you, or they went their separate ways, or you went on a different path, but you always kept that memory of them with you. So this film reminded me of that stuff as well. Night Ram is one of the most terrific indies that I've seen, but it's not really indie. I came to know it is made like an indie, but it stars an actor who is he's not an Australian. The film is based in Australia. It's shot in Australia. It's an Australian story, And the actor I felt is someone from Australia, but he's not. He is an American actor, and he really portrayed this character magnificently and made me think that he's some Australian guy playing Australian guy in this film. And it's also made like an indie low budget film, but because it's in tune with the reality of the film. It need not be a huge film, and it is very disturbing. Like, I'm not going to say what it's about, but it's a very disturbing film as well. A silently disturbing film. Boiling Point was a fun film, about the horrors uh, of a restaurant, and being a chef, and being cooking in a restaurant that is very highly important in the society, and all important people come there to dine. Running a restaurant like that is not an easy thing to do. That's what the film was. Nobody, I enjoyed Nobody. The first act of Nobody is where the real strength lies of this film. I feel that the later things are good, they're fun, they have the way they've been executed, it's entertaining. But it's the first act of the film. It does very similar things very differently. And people always compare this film with John Wick, and it makes sense to compare it with John Wick, because it is conceptually very similar. But in the first act, the differences between John Wick's character and his world and his journey and his motivations, and this guy's motivation, his life, his family, and what drives his decision making, all that is very different from John Wick. The character is completely different from John Wick, and that's what makes this film very different from John Wick. And he was exceptional in the film. Bob Odenkirk, Hutch Mansell, Blue Valentine, a very sad romantic film about a bit of toxic romance, you can say. The Tale is a film that went beyond my radar when it was out in 2018. I wanted to watch it, but I don't know why. I saw the poster of the film and it felt like a mother and daughter film, but it's not a mother-daughter film. There's a twist to it. About the poster that you're seeing right now, there is a twist in it, and it's one of the silently feminist movies that I've seen. A film that is not propaganda oriented, and it wants you to explore on your own throughout the journey of the film, throughout the journey of the story that has been explored of this woman's life and her past. It wants you to make your own decisions and get out your own conclusions out of what means what, and what sense do I make of this. It doesn't spoon feed you with the propaganda, which I think is terrific. It's really an exceptional film, I think, which I feel should have got a little more love and acclaim, I guess, and maybe some important awards as well. So yeah, that's that. Red Rocket is the most recent film that I've seen, an A24 film. The first thing that I heard was that people called it as the Uncut Gems of 2021, but I wouldn't call it Uncut Gems. It's a film of its own. The last film that this director made, Florida Project, I saw it in the theaters and I left it. It was late in the night in the film festival and I wanted to reach home, and I felt that maybe it's not my kind of a film. So I saw the whole film later and I did like it, but maybe I feel that the film could have been a little more engaging for me. It wasn't. But Red Rocket wasn't that way. So Red Rocket, from the word go, it was engaging. And it was also a lot more funnier. It is a funnier film. Not more funnier, because I guess Florida Project is not meant to be funny. But this film was definitely meant to be funny, but it was also meant to be sad. So it's a very unique, funny, sad kind of film about a guy who's like an idiot, but also a jerk, and also an asshole, but kind of a likable asshole. I would say likable as a character, not as a person. Like, if this guy comes near your life in person, you wouldn't want to waste a minute with him. You will realize how the depth of his existence is not much, and you wouldn't want to spend a minute with him. But as a film character, he's very interesting. The things that he does around are very interesting to look at, and the way he reacts, and the way he always runs away from things, and the purely evil things that he also does are also interesting to look at. I mean, so yeah, there's also a hidden perspective that I felt about this film. That the film uses the whole Donald Trump campaign as a backdrop of the film. Like, in a parallel way, Donald Trump is campaigning for presidentship, and at the end of the film, I think, or somewhere before the end of the film, he becomes the president of America. So I somehow felt that this guy, this asshole guy, the lead protagonist of the film, was like Donald Trump, and there's a character in the film. I won't reveal it much. There's a character in the film that feels like that is America. Like, this guy is screwing up that character, and is making that character dream big. Like, it is showing him dreams. He's showing the character dreams which might never come true, or which, even if they come true, they're not gonna be ideal. They're only gonna make that character's life worse. And that just feels more exactly like how probably Donald Trump promised things to American citizens, and those things ended up being something else. And after 4 years, not everyone, but a lot of people who sensible people in the country wanted him to go out, and yet there were half people who didn't wanted him to go out. So that's also what says about this film, that there are also some people who buy the shit that this guy sells. So that kind of thing. So I think that's a huge video now. It's a 1 hour video, but I think I've covered a lot of stuff. So that 2021 was a good year for cinema, but I feel that it could have been a better year. 2019, in my understanding, is a phenomenal year in the recent years that I've seen. 2019, then 2014 was exceptional, but 2019, I feel that somehow the cinematic world knew that something strange is going to happen in 2020, so just get all the great movies out on 2019. That's what happened, I guess. Yeah, but 2021 was better than 2020 for sure, but it could have been greater. I feel 2021, there should be more content than just MCU stuff, and I hope it will happen in 2022. Let's hope that. Take care.